So from the very beginning, Christians were sent people. We are sent out into the world to share the good news of God's love for everybody, to proclaim peace, to help the blind recover sight, to release the prisoners, those who are oppressed, to be ministers of reconciliation in a divided world. That's the calling. We are called and sent out into the world. And in our text for today, Jesus is giving us some traveling advice. How can we travel forth as ministers? And before you think that ministers are just the people who stand in front and worship, remember that in our tradition, everyone is a minister. Everyone has a ministry, and one ministry is no more or less important than any other one. So Jesus is giving you and me guidance for our ministry. And he's also giving us some good advice for the journey of being human. So among other things, I want to focus on just three things that Jesus is encouraging us to do. He's encouraging us to travel together, to travel lightly, and to travel on. So let's take those one at a time. Jesus encourages us to travel together. Now, he makes it clear from the beginning, this is a lot of work. He says, what a huge harvest, and how few the harvest hands. So on your knees and ask the God of the harvest to send harvest hands, which of course means to send other people in addition to yourself. But as we minister to God's people, which is all the people in the world, we're called to do it in partnership with somebody else. You notice Jesus is sending them out in pairs. And so we're called to partner up, to share the privilege and the responsibility of ministry with at least one other person. There's an old African proverb, the reason that two antelopes walk together is so that the one can blow the dust off the other's eyes. A beautiful image, I think, for marriage. That's what we can do for each other as partners. We can blow the dust off one another's eyes. And if you think of a healthy marriage, you're working together, right, as partners, hopefully, inspiring your children, encouraging them, disciplining them, caring for them, and eventually sending them out into the world, into their ministry. And at your best, you're bringing a diversity of gifts and talents together and hopefully presenting a united front and making a greater impact as a partnership than you could on your own. It's also a good model for ministry. Partnership in ministry. In our men's work, we have men's council groups that meet monthly, 6 to 8 guys, and each of them is led by 2 stokers. And these men are called to stoke the fire of the small group, and they share in leadership. They take turns convening and facilitating and closing each and every meeting. So it's a great model because sometimes you're the leader and you can receive the feedback, and sometimes you're the observer and you can give the feedback. And so it benefits both leaders, and I think it benefits the group who get to experience at least 2 different styles of male leadership. This past week, we had our first open mic here at Westside, and for the first time, what a success! 20 artists were up here performing, and we had 70 or 80 people in the sanctuary celebrating an evening of music, and I'm telling you, it wouldn't have happened without 2 dynamic duos, partnerships. Eric and Gabe, I don't know where they are at the moment. I know Gabe's up there as Eric. They planned this idea, they attended to the details, they welcomed people, but there was another duo. That's Donna and Scott, who are preparing to be married this month, I believe, right? And they were working hard as a couple. I think Scott was out getting coffee, and they were setting up the tables. But the point here is that the partnership worked in this case, and the people who came experienced something that they wouldn't have with that kind of leadership. Now, I've said to you many times, I'm a recovering Lone Ranger. I am learning sometimes the hard way, how to be a partner in ministry. And I'm grateful for pastors like Liz and Christine and Penny and so many others in ministries. And I've come to understand that my experience of fatigue or loneliness or frustration is often God's way of reminding me that I'm falling back into bad habits, bad patterns. And I'm learning to see those as warning signs. God's way of reminding me to share the ministry with other people. And God is calling me to consider who I might partner with in order for my ministry to be more fruitful and sustainable for the long term. So here's the question for you. Who are you being invited to ask to partner with you in some ministry passion of yours? Point number 2, Jesus is encouraging us also to travel lightly. He says, travel light, comb and toothbrush, and no extra luggage. That's a contemporary translation. The one that some of you may be more familiar is, carry no purse, no bags, no sandals for the journey. This is good advice. If you've ever gone traveling anywhere, you know that whatever you take, you've got to take for the duration of your trip. So you better think wisely about what you really need and what would be nice to have, but probably don't need it. I think all of us would be wise to ask ourselves, what will it be like for my loved ones to clean out my house after I die? When they go through my belongings, will they discover a whole lot of stuff that was kept long after its usefulness? Or will they discover that I've been practicing letting go long before the big letting go? Jesus is saying, learn to let go now and bring with you only what you really need for the next stage of the journey. But I think implied in this is the idea that luggage isn't just the physical stuff, it's the emotional and spiritual baggage that we're carrying in our lives. Many of us carry luggage from the past. Trauma, pain from the past, guilt, regret, shame, anger, resentment. We hold on to it and we're bogged down by it. And Jesus says, let it go. Let it go. Some of us are more likely to carry luggage about the future. We're afraid, or we have fantasies of what it has to be, or wishful thinking, or unrealistic expectations, or demands, and we place those on ourselves, on others, on God, on reality. And Jesus is saying, just put that luggage down. Don't carry it with you. Thomas à Kempis says, they travel lightly whom God's grace carries. They travel lightly whom God's grace carries. When we let go of unnecessary luggage, rather than try to push the river, we give ourselves more fully to the river current and let it take us to where we need to go. When we stop trying to take the pen out of God's hands and we remember that we are the pen in God's hands, we tend to stay in touch with the story that God wants us to write. And rather than get bogged down with expectations, we learn, as I mentioned last week, how to be expectant without expectations. And in doing so, I think we open ourselves to the great mystery that anyone who's genuinely being committed to giving will understand, that in giving, we receive. And in learning to receive, we learn how to give. Too many of us are striving to be self-sufficient, independent, trying to plan for every contingency possible. But here's the deal. Self-sufficient people don't know how to receive help. They're unwilling to acknowledge their need for grace. So be careful when you try to become self-sufficient or independent, because you are cutting yourself off from learning how to give, because it's only in learning how to receive that we're able to give. And of course, in learning to make our life an offering, we receive the great gifts that Jesus wants all of us to have. So here's the question number 2 for you. What luggage do you need to put down in your ministry? Finally, Jesus encourages us to travel on. Notice how Jesus is calling us to bring peace. That's our job description. Bring peace wherever you go. Don't do a market research. Don't do a risk assessment about where, Jesus is calling you to go. Don't determine whether, they are ready to receive what you have to offer. If anything, just focus on one thing. Cultivate your own openness, your own readiness to be peaceful and gracious. That's the work that we're called to do. But he also says, I'm sending you out like lambs in the midst of wolves. Now, I was woken up in the middle of the night in the last year by a fawn being attacked by a fox or a coyote, and I heard sounds that I still can't get out of my head. This is not a pretty picture, to be a lamb in the midst of wolves. It's a reminder that the world can be cruel and harsh and hard and cold. And there are many wolves among us. And the work is going to be hard and sometimes horrifyingly, traumatically hard. And yet, Jesus is insistent. We are called to be people of peace, to be like the lamb in the midst of the wolves. Now, on the surface, it seems like this is a recipe for being brutally attacked day after day after day. But if you notice, Jesus is not calling us to be doormats. Did you notice what he said? It doesn't sound very Christ-like, and you may have missed it. You may not have heard it, but here's what he said. When you enter a town and you're not received, go out into the street and say, the only thing we got from you is dirt on our feet, and we're giving it back. Sometimes the most Christian thing we can do is move on. Move on. To offer a word of peace and then step away from the toxic person or the toxic situation. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is not engage in an argument with an argumentative person who has no interest and no capacity for dialogue. Sometimes the best thing we can do on social media is unfriend the person who just wants to start a fight with us. As a recovering people pleaser, that's a hard one for me. Real hard. I'm supposed to be the nice guy, right? You're supposed to be a nice Christian. First of all, the word nice, you're not going to find it in the Bible. You'll find peaceful, you'll find kind. There's no word about being nice. And over the years, if I'm honest, I've probably wasted a lot of energy and time engaging people who I had no business engaging, and I knew it. And here's the thing, I suspect you know it too. When you're beating your head against the wall with somebody, that just may be a sign from God to stop beating your head against the wall with this person. The best gift that you can give them is to set a boundary and say, you know what, I'm just not going to engage. I'm going to detach with love, which is important work for all of us. I think we need to just trust our instincts a little bit with this. We probably know those people and those circumstances and situations more than we realize. So that's the final question for you. What do you need, or who do you need to travel on from in your ministry? 3 questions that Jesus is giving all of us to ponder in the days ahead.